And we're continuing with the second chapter of the Cockatrice Boys by Joan Aiken. We've just met Dakin, the drummer boy, who is basically going to be the servant for this super cockatrice train that's been built for the Cockatrice Corps. And let's see how the journey commences. There were 22 coaches and an observation platform on the Cockatrice Bell. During the 2 weeks training period that followed before the Monster Brigade were allowed out on active service, Dakin learned the order of the cars by heart, backwards and forwards. Every morning, while he cleaned the windows, he had to recite them to Corporal Dwindle. Engine, cab, arsenal, broom cupboard, ops room, men's mess, galley officers' mess, officers' quarters, video room, colonel's cabin, table tennis car, 10 privates' barracks, boot car, and the observation platform. To help him remember the order, Dakin took the initial letters EABOMGOOBCTPPPPPPPPPPPPPPP and made a sentence from them. Every agile boy outwits monsters, grapple off on very cold Tuesdays. Pythons, Peridexians, pukas, 7 porcupines, and basilisks. The colonel's car and officers' rooms were handsomely furnished with Turkish carpets, mahogany couches, brass fittings, and potted palms. The men's carriages were much plainer, with slatted bunks that had to be folded back in the daytime, and the men were crowded 10 to a compartment, whereas the colonel had a whole bed-sitter couch to himself, with armchairs, bookshelves, and a grand piano. The officers slept on folding beds in their spacious parlor, but there were only 5 of them, a major, 2 captains, 2 lieutenants. So at least they were better off than the privates. It doesn't seem fair, said Dakin to Corporal Dwindle as he polished windows. Nobody asked your opinion, said Corporal Dwindle, but then he added, life ain't fair, take it or leave it. Why should my missus have got swallowed by a hammerhead? She never did anything wrong in her whole life. Only watched telly and knitted 472 pairs of socks. Life ain't fair. You might as well get used to that. Dakin went on polishing windows. Meanwhile, up in Manchester, his cousin Sana was leading a sad and suppressed existence. Polishing 320 windows every day would have seemed a treat to her. On the first morning of action, as soon as engine driver Catchpole blew the reveille on his engine whistle, Dakin shot out of his bunk to the boot car, flung on his uniform, and dashed along the corridor to the galley, where he boiled a kettle on the brass hot plate and made a pot of tea for the colonel. He knew how, since he had often made tea for his mother, Mrs. Prateman, Miss Jeopardy, and the other people who lived in the Barclays Bank strong room. Then he carried the tea on a tray to the colonel's cabin, tapped on the door, opened it, and went smartly in. A brown face glared at him from under the royal blue velvet counterpane, a face with glittering gray eyes, bristly white eyebrows, and long sweeping white mustaches. And what, in the name of pink pandagem, brought you in? Snarled the colonel, putting in a single eyeglass. Morning, sir. Drummer Dakin, sir. Brought your tea, sir, said Dakin, and set the cup on the mahogany bed pedestal. After one sip, the colonel's eyebrows almost glided over the top of his bald head. You call this gnat's bath water tea? What did you make it with? Stewed dried grass, like always. Real tea had long since vanished from the British Isles. Well, you can take it and tell the mess orderly to wash dishes in it, or his feet. From now on, I'll make my own tea. And the colonel pointed to an automatic tea maker at the other side of his bed. It had a radio-controlled kettle, which just at this moment blew out a puff of steam and then shot a neat jet of water into a small pot, while a bugle recording played. It's great to get up in the morning. From the pot floated a scent of brandy. Blow me! Oh, blow me, said Dakin, greatly impressed. Neat, eh? Runs on batteries from the engine. The colonel poured himself a cup of tar-colored liquid. Ah, that's better. Now run along, boy, and take my boots and polish them till you can see your teeth in them. And don't bring me any more of that hogwash tea. No, sir. Thank you, sir. At this time in Manchester, Mrs. Florence Monsoon and her niece Sauna were, like the other inhabitants of the city, living on thistledown tea when they could get it, dandelion root porridge, and they were burning up Sauna's old school books for fuel. "And it'll be these next," said Aunt Floss, casting a covetous look at Sauna's twin teddy bears. "Oh, no, please." "Well, what else have we got? You don't have any dolls, do you?" "No," said Sauna, trembling. "They got left behind in Newcastle." Aunt Floss compressed her lips and continued to eye the bears. After 2 weeks of training, it was announced to the Cockatrice Corps that the train would go out on a trial run the next day. "Where are we going?" Aiken asked the corporal, who was giving him instructions on how to clean his liquid air pistol. "Manchester." "Fancy," said Aiken. "My Aunt Floss lives there, or she did before the troubles began. Of course, I don't know if she's still alive now. She might have been ate by a hammerhead. After Dad died, we stopped hearing from her. I went to Manchester once when I was a kid. It's a big place, isn't it? I remember tall buildings and lots of buses. No buses there now, I don't suppose. And people are all starving. That's why we're going, to take them supplies. There's a big colony of snarks all around Manchester. Got the town surrounded. The people built a town wall and dug a moat. But they're trapped inside, been radioing for help. When they could raise a signal, that is. What provisions are we taking them?" "Tinned carrots." "I think I'd just as soon starve," said Aiken. "I'd as soon starve as eat the muck they serve us in the mess." Or, "I'd as soon starve as eat the muck they serve us in the mess," muttered Private Quilroy, stropping away at his kelpie knife. Everybody was grumbling about the food served in the mess. "How are we supposed to fight hammerheads and shovel-tuskers on watery mash and goat soup? The bangers taste of minced mud. The tapioca's nobbut ground-up fiberglass. The wads are made of plasterboard and lined with dental floss." Still, despite complaints about the food, the whole troop were in high spirits when, for the first time on the 1st of December, the Cockatrice Bell huffed and chuffed slowly backwards up the long ramp that led from the pillared chamber under King's Cross. A military band on the platform played Totsy's Goodbye. The Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, the royal family, and a large, tearful crowd were left behind, waving flags made of old tea cloths. Ensign Driver Catchpole joyously tooted his whistle, and the great glittering train crept gingerly into real daylight at last. It was all garland and tinsel and hung with small red and green glass bells, because Christmas was only a few weeks away. "Coo!" breathed Aiken, blinking against the dazzle as he gazed out, but Sergeant Bellswinger roared over the intercom, "Snart glasses at the double, in position!" And they all clapped their protective spectacles on their noses. Behind the train, the defensive gate clanged down over the mouth of the tunnel. The engine unhitched and rolled up a side track from to the front of the train. Then it rehitched itself, and the Cockatrice Bell was on her way. At first, the landscape north of King's Cross was a bit of a disappointment to Aiken. For 60 miles, nothing could be seen but pink and yellow rubble, great dusty piles of smashed houses. Gradually, these were replaced by snow-scattered country, very wild country, with clumps of scrubby trees and bramble thickets and tangly 3-meter hedges and huge, ragged weeds on the railway embankments. It was all quite silent, except for the mild, regular noise of the train. Chunk-a-chunk-a-chunk, chunk, manica-chunk, as it ambled its way along the rusty rails. Occasionally, the shriek of a monster could be heard, and among the bushes, monsters of every kind could be seen, lurking, prowling, flapping, fighting each other, or just staring at the train with huge glassy eyes as it slipped by. "What about bridges?" General Grug Pennington had said to Lord Ealing, who replied peevishly, "How can we tell? Who knows what condition the bridges may be in? The men will have to survey and repair bridges when they come to them. If necessary, under covering fire from the train." Luckily, the bridges during the first part of the journey, as far as Oxford, were found to be in fair condition. The Cockatrice Bell passed over them safely, gliding at a cautious 20 miles per hour. Meanwhile, the men of the troop had their hands full. Many monsters attacked the train. Flying hammerheads swooped down from above, their ugly jaws snapping and scooping and were fought off with flamethrowers and crossbows. Great herds of griffins, foot monsters, cockadrills, and shovel-tuskers roamed beside the permanent way, often crossing the rails, snapping and slashing and clawing at the men as they battled to clear the track. Progress was often exasperatingly slow. Still, as Corporal Dwindle said to Sergeant Bellswinger toward the evening of the first day, every little helps, and we must have done in quite a few of the brutes. The men are getting used to 'em. Pity Private Quilroy had to go and get swallowed by that shovel-tusker. If only he'd studied his drill and remembered to hold his crossbow sideways on. Ah, well, said Corporal Dwindle. At least it's a lesson to the others. Now do you see, he told Dakin, why you got to keep those windows crystal clear? We need all the view we can get. Beg pardon, Sergeant, exclaimed Private Bundley, coming into the men's mess, where Dakin was cleaning the windows, and the two NCOs were taking a cup of tea. Beg pardon, but we've found a stowaway in the arsenal, hid away at the back behind the stack of December guns, she was. She? Demanded Bellswinger wrathfully. And who, in blazes, may she be? Here she be, Sergeant, said Private Bundley, and he pushed into the mess cabin a rather strange figure, at first hardly recognizable as a person, for it was all tied up in sacks. However, when these were removed, they saw a lanky, melancholy-looking, gray-haired woman wearing a homespun skirt, leather knee boots, and a man's foreign jacket. Why, the prize, was she wearing all those sacks? To make herself look like a bundle of ammunition, I reckon. The colonel will have to see her. Come along, you, Bellswinger roared at the woman, who seemed too alarmed to speak, and he led her to the cabin of the colonel, who was playing waltzes on his grand piano. Dakin followed inquisitively. Dusk had fallen by now, and he didn't see the point of cleaning windows, if you couldn't see out anyway. He stood in the cabin doorway, looking in. A stowaway? A female stowaway? On my train? The colonel was scandalized. What's your name, woman? What do you mean by it? Why, in the name of Blue Ruin, did you do it? The stowaway seemed to pick up a bit of courage in the colonel's presence. She looked at the grand piano and drew a disapproving figure over the dust on the lid. If you please, sir, my name's Mrs. Churt, and I hid under all those pepper grinders, or whatever they are, because I did so long to get a glimpse of anything green. I used to have a little garden, sir, before all these horrible griffins and foot monsters and bonacons come along. We lived out past Blackheath way, and I grew lettuce and Canterbury bells and radishes, and I can't abide living my life in the dark like a blessed earwig, sir. That's why I done it. Well, but my good woman, other people have to put up with living underground, and so must you. There's no room for you on this train. We'll be obliged to stop, you know, and put you off. Beg pardon, sir, muttered Lieutenant Upfold in an undertone from the doorway. No, it ain't my place to speak, but the old lady wouldn't last 10 minutes if you put her out here. There's a deuce lot of basilisks about. You can smell 'em like wet washing, don't you know? I don't need you to teach me my business, thank you, Upfold, snapped the colonel. But Mrs. Churt fell on her knees and clasped her hands and cried, oh, please, sir, don't put me off. I can cook. My old Churt, what was took by a telepod, he used to say I was a real grade 1 cook, the best in Kent. And I have useful dreams, sir, often. And I can make drinks for the lads, and cakes and that, and give 'em little treats like those Vivandiers used to in the Foreign Legion. Actually, she says, like those Vivandiers used to in the Foreign Leg Iron. And I could make you a cross-stitch cover for your piano, sir, to keep the dust off. What about the dreams? Or what kind of dreams? Demanded the colonel, who had been attracted, though he would not admit it, by the offer of the cross-stitch cover. Dreams like that show which way to go if there's a question about it. Well, that's as may be. I'll think about it overnight in the meantime, Colonel Clipspeak told the sergeant. You had best lock the woman in the broom cupboard. Is it true, Sergeant, that the men have been grumbling about the catering? Can't say as to that, sir, said the sergeant stiffly. That's in the officers' mess. Leaves everything to be desired, murmured Lieutenant Upfold. Sergeant Bellswinger hustled Mrs. Chart away, but Dakin, lingering, whispered urgently, Sir, the food's horrible. Soup made of melted boot polish, and the spuds are like summit that's been dug up. Potatoes are dug up, you idiotic boy. No, sir, I knows better than that. They comes out of tins. In 2 days, Mrs. Churt was cooking for the entire troop, both officers and men. Her vegetable stews were mouth-watering, so were her steamed puddings, rich, crumbly, and wreathed in strawberry jam. Her donuts were light as thistledown. Her raisin cake was satisfyingly stodgy. Mess orderly Widgery, who had been doing the cooking, was sent back to grease December guns in the arsenal, and Mrs. Churt presided over the galley. She had green fingers, too. She started to grow little slips of parsley and chives in jam jars. She polished the colonel's potted palm with salad oil, and she rescued drooping geraniums in the officer's parlor from an early death. And her cross-stitch cover for the colonel's piano was immediately put in hand, and it grew inch by inch. Dakin soon became very fond of Mrs. Churt. He would sit in the gallery sometimes of an evening practicing his drum taps on a tea-cloth stretched over a sieve, while she did her cross-stitching and made a sassafras drink for the men and talked about the happy times before the monsters came. We used to go to Broadstairs for the summer. You ever been to the seaside? We used to go to Broadstairs for the summer. You ever been to the seaside, Dakin? He shook his head. Hey, poor little fellow, fancy that, dearie me. Sometimes I wonder what we ever done to deserve having these monsters sent here. You reckon they were sent, Mrs. Churt? Oh, they were sent all right. I did hear in the old days factories used to dump all their rubbish in a quarry or two out to sea. Later on, up in the high sky, where they reckoned it'd blow away. Maybe somebody did the same thing with this little lot, just dumped them off like kittens in a rain barrel, or maybe it was done out of spite. Somebody had it in for us. Corporal Big Toe and a couple of privates came in asking if there was any chance of a hot drink. While Mrs. Churt served them, Dakin pondered over what she had suggested. Could somebody have wanted to get rid of the monsters and just thought this was the best place to tip them? Maybe there was something in what Mrs. Churt had said. On the 18th day of travel, they approached the outskirts of Manchester. Progress had been extremely slow for the last 48 hours. Several bridges needed a lot of repair, and 2 of the men engaged in the work had been lost. Private Goodwillie was carried off by a manticore, and Private Skulk had the misfortune to look at a basilisk and, of course, died instantly. Didn't keep his snark glasses properly greased, grumbled Sergeant Bellwether. Snark glasses won't help you, not against a basilisk, said Corporal Entichnap. In fact, if you ask me, snark glasses aren't much good at all. What we need is a snark mask, like what Driver Catchpole got issued. If you know so much, why don't you go to the colonel and say so? I've a good mind to do just that. You go billicking to the colonel. I'll put you on wind vane duty, growled the sergeant. Wind vane duty was very risky. It meant crawling along the top of the train, very often through driving snow, clearing out the vanes, which soon became choked with dust when the train was in motion, and wiping the stellar energy panels. The worst danger was from flying hammerheads, but also the train rolled from side to side as it traveled, so there was a fair chance of being flung off. Entichnap scowled, but remained silent. But when Dakin took in the colonel's beautifully polished boots next morning, the latter demanded, "What's all this about snark masks?" "The saying is how the men ought to be issued them, sir." "Do you know how much a snark mask costs, boy?" rapped the colonel. "No, sir. Lord Ealing told me I was only to use them in the last resort." "Where would the last resort be, sir?" "Oh, go away, sir," said Dakin. "Well, now what?" "Sir, I never get a chance to play my drum. Sergeant Bellswinger won't let me. He says it makes too much finical row. That it would rouse up all the finical monsters between here and Greta Green, sir. When can I play it?" Don't you worry," said the colonel. rolling over under the velvet bedspread to help himself to another cup of tea. You'll get to play it soon enough. At that moment, both Dockin and Colonel Clipspeak were greatly astonished to hear a voice apparently coming out of the Colonel's early morning tea kettle. It said, "Here, we got a bloke wants to get to Hempfields. What's it like out that way?" "No go," said another voice. "It's a regular breeding ground for snarks. Tell him if he goes, it's at his own risk. The corporation won't admit liability." "Okay, I'll tell him that." "You got snarks your way too?" "Have we got snarks? Like starlings, warrants full of 'em. They say the young ones are harmless. You look at 'em, you don't vanish. You ever tried?" "No, but my cousin Albert did. His kid brought one in for a pet. Cuddly little thing it was." "What happened?" "It grew a bit older and looked at them and they all vanished." "Well then, what I mean is, if we could go after 'em when they're young..." The two voices died away in a forest of crackle. "Well, I'm blessed," said the Colonel. "My kettle seems to have picked up a radio frequency." "Yes, sir," said Dyken. "Hempsfield is a place in Manchester, sir. My Aunt Floss used to live there. Do you think I might get to see my Aunt Floss by Christmas, sir?" Aunt Floss used to have a tea maker set like yours, sir." "So did lots of people," snapped the Colonel. "You send Major Scounty to me right away." "Yes, sir," and we will pause there.